Hey guys, Theoretical BS just made a 31-minute video about morality. This is my reply in defense of the theistic position. Let's jump right in.
Morality is about what is right and what is wrong. So the first question I ask, and the first question we all should be asking is, what do we mean when we call something morally right or morally wrong?
Morality is about two things. It's about what goals and values you should have, and how to best achieve those goals. For example, human life is valuable. And since human life is valuable, you shouldn't go around raping and killing people. Now, as humans, we recognize that some objective values exist. We're literally hardwired that way. Now, later I'm going to make a video about modern evolutionary psychology where I prove that's the case. But rather than go into all the science of it in this video, I'm just going to point out a piece of your video that actually shows that you already recognize this fact.
It is objectively true that something like rape causes unnecessary suffering.
Now, if you mean it when you say that it is objectively true that rape causes unnecessary suffering, then a rapist should not rape people even if they subjectively value their personal pleasure over the victim's well-being. And if you can tell people what they should value, then you're admitting that objective value exists. Now, the most common objection to the idea that God is the source of objective morality is
the Euthyphro dilemma. Is something moral because it's commanded by God, or does God command it because it's moral? Now this is a question I was asking on YouTube long before I ever even realized that this is an actual thing called the Euthyphro dilemma, because it seemed like such an obvious problem to me. It forces the Christian into a dichotomy. If the former is true, then morality becomes arbitrary. And no matter what God commands, it'll be moral by definition, even if it caused, say, endless unnecessary suffering. This is a problem because it renders it a meaningless tautology to say that God or God's commands are good. Now, on the other hand, if the latter is true, then it means God is appealing to some moral standard external to himself, making him just the messenger rather than the actual source of morality itself. And this, of course, exposes theism as unnecessary for objective morality altogether. The typical apologetic response to this is to say, well, it's neither. Something is good not just because God commands it, but because it reflects God's eternal, unchanging nature. Well, there's a few problems with that, but in this video I'll just go over two of them. One in practice and one in principle. Let's do practice first. Is murder wrong?
Now that question would have been infinitely more meaningful if you had said, is killing wrong? Because murder is typically defined as unjustified killing. Asking is murder wrong is then like asking is unjustified killing unjustified? Of course it is. By definition it has to be. That being said, you actually define murder in kind of a funny way. So given your unique definition of what murder is, I'm going to say that murder is not always wrong. And you guys will see why in a minute.
Okay, yeah, murder is wrong, right? Well, what is murder and why is it wrong? What is murder? Murder is intentionally terminating the life of a human being without their consent. And why is intentionally terminating the life of a human being without their consent wrong?
It's not. Killing non-consenting people could be right. For example, killing non-consenting people can include acts of self-defense and even capital punishment, and it's entirely possible that those events may not be wrong. It's also quite obvious that asking something like, is killing for a human for entertainment wrong, is a different moral question from asking, is killing a human in self-defense wrong? You can't sweep both of those questions under the same rug with blanket statements like, killing is wrong. If you're going to tell me something is immoral, I need not only an action, but also an intention, like the action of killing humans for the intention of entertainment is wrong.
Well, as the Christian apologist will tell you, it's wrong because it's inconsistent with God's nature. Uh-oh. Seems we've hit a little snag here.
Not really. He then goes on to argue that because God killed non-consenting people, that killing non-consenting people must be good. However, this has two problems. One, he forgot to mention intentions. Morality is composed of actions plus intentions, and he only looked at actions. His argument becomes absurd for the same reason that it's absurd to say that all killing must be acceptable if killing for self-defense is acceptable. And secondly, what's acceptable for a judge may be forbidden for the general public. That is definitely not might makes right, as I'm going to explain. By being a fair-minded person and studying law, you may be able to eventually become a judge. And as a judge, you may be able to imprison someone. Now, just because it may be good for a fair-minded judge to imprison people, that doesn't mean it's good for John Doe to lock people he thinks are unjust up in his basement. Let's see what else he has to say.
The second problem with this response is that saying morals reflect God's nature doesn't actually do anything to answer the question. It only puts the question into different terms. As a matter of fact, it only makes the dilemma more interesting. Is God's nature one of honesty, for example, because honesty is right? Or is honesty right just because that's what God's nature happens to be?
Now, the original Euthyphro dilemma asked if morality was based on God's arbitrary commands, and the answer was no, it's rooted in his essential nature. Now, in your dilemma, your new dilemma, number 2 is the correct choice. Except, a nature refers to a being's essential properties. So natures don't happen to be, rather they essentially are. This makes for a non-arbitrary and entirely plausible foundation for the existence of objective value. This new version of the Euthyphro dilemma seems completely tame. It doesn't even put the theist in a difficult position.
To say that God's nature is one of honesty because honesty is morally better than dishonesty certainly wouldn't answer the question. Any 4-year-old could obliterate that account of morality just by having the capacity to ask, why? Why is honesty morally better than dishonesty?
Now, here he goes on to ridicule how he thinks a theist would answer, but here's how I would actually respond. He asks, why is honesty better than dishonesty? I would say because dishonesty often causes suffering. And why is suffering often bad? Because we recognize human life is objectively valuable, and that informs us of what the foundation of morality must be like.
Yet why is God's immutable nature one of honesty rather than dishonesty? Oh, because honesty is morally better than dishonesty. Yeah, and why is it again that honesty is morally better than dishonesty in the first place?
That's equivalent to asking, why are God's essential properties the way they are? The answer itself is hidden in the question. Essential properties are essentially the way they are. The concept of having essential properties which could have been different is absurd. It doesn't make sense to have non-essential essential properties. God and his essential properties exist out of necessity.
Does this mean that God is concerned for the well-being of others? No, it just means that God is himself. Does it mean that God's commands minimize unnecessary harm and suffering? No, it just means that God is himself. Does it mean that God's commands propagate justice and equality? Nope, just means that God is himself. Could God's commands spawn unfathomable suffering and harm and still be good by definition? Yes.
No. First, we recognize objective value exists. Our knowledge of objective value then informs us of what the foundation of objective morality must be like. So by recognizing objective value, it tells me what God's essential properties are. That allows me not only to see that God's nature is not to cause unnecessary suffering, but that it couldn't even possibly be that way.
Aside from punishment or reward, we don't know why we should do what God commands us to do.
Punishment and reward are irrelevant. It's about objective value. If human life is objectively valuable, then you should value human life. And if you value human life, you should act in a way that promotes peace and reduces suffering. God's role is to be the source of objective morality. He is the best, and I dare say the only coherent explanation for the existence of objective value. As always, test everything, hold on to the good.